Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the live stream with Avero Advisors. We're excited to be here this week. It's been a while since we've been live on our LinkedIn platforms. We have been traveling, and we have been so excited to meet you guys, to hear from you guys, learn about what you're dealing with in your organizations. And so we're super excited today to come to you with common pitfalls in RFPs, or why your RFPs are not getting the response that you require. So I have with today Lexi Webster. She's our proposal coordinator, and I know she is very excited to share her insight. For reference, we respond to over 120 RFPs every year. So we are very well versed, or at least we feel like we are in the RFP realm, and what you guys are looking for, and what works best and what doesn't. We also help our clients craft RFPs specifically for software vendors. So when they are looking to select a new cloud-based software, we're very well versed in helping them craft those requirements for the RFP so that vendors can craft a great response to their proposal. So I know I've talked too much. Thank you guys for joining us today. Please excuse the sun. I'm dealing with that today, and the boxes behind my head. I couldn't move them. It's all of our conference swag. So just bear with us. But if you're joining us today, please let us know you're here in the chat. We love it when you guys heckle us and ask questions and keep us on our toes. So please let us know where you're joining from and ask any question you want to ask. But I'm going to let Lexi spend a few hours, not hours even. I'm so sorry. Few minutes introducing herself, and I'm going to get my life together over here. So Lexi, I'm going to let you have the floor now.
I apologize for my background too. It's not ideal. So I'm with you, Megan. But I'm Lexi Webster. I'm the proposal coordinator at Avero. I went to school at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and got my Master of Public Administration and Policy degree. And I worked for Avero part-time during that. Got a different job out of grad school, but then eventually government was a little slow. So I ended up coming back to Avero to be their proposal coordinator, because what I really loved at Avero, which most people have the opposite experience, I didn't really like the project work. I liked trying to get new business. So I'm on Megan's team as the proposal coordinator, and I search for RFPs every week, craft responses to those, and coordinate that whole process.
Yes, and she does a great job, and we're happy to have her on our team. She's being very humble. She also helps me in anything that I ask of her, whether it's managing our CRM or going to conferences, calling on future prospects. She does it all. So, and she does it very well. So super to have you on today, Lex. Real quick, for those of you who are joining us who are new and who don't know who Avero is, we are an independent third-party consulting firm dealing only in the public sector to help local government agencies modernize through technology. And I know I'm using a lot of buzzwords. So what does that mean? We are the trusted advisor that helps you break through the noise of everything that's out in the market, right? What vendors are telling you, the latest and greatest. Right now there's huge talks about AI and how that could help your organization run more efficient. And you guys a lot of times just do not know where to begin. And so we are that trusted partner that you can bring in for that hand holding and that strategizing on how to help your organization run more efficiently. So let's dive into it. Lexi, first question I have for you, what is your biggest challenge? You just told our viewers that, we look through thousands of RFPs every week. And I know that can be time consuming, but two questions. What is your biggest challenge when doing that? And then also, what are you looking for? What are some of those keywords that you're looking for so that, you're not spending days at a time, sifting through all of these?
Yeah. So I'll start with the last question first, because it is an easier one and will kind of help answer the first one. The first thing I look for when I am picking RFPs to go for is the scope of work section, consulting services, optimization services, organizational assessment. Those are all things Avero does, business process redesign. So really, I skip everything else, go straight to the scope of work and see if that is something we do, we could do, expanding our services, things like that. And to go to the first question, it's really challenging when there is a vague scope of work, or you read the scope of work and it's only 3 sentences long. You would be surprised. We have saw that before.
Yes.
And it's very clear they don't know what their project is. They almost should have went out to RFP like, we need a consultant to help us define a project at this point. We don't even know what the project is. Very vague requirements makes it super hard. Because even if it sounds like something we might do, we're probably going to take a stab at it, but it's not going to be super personalized. And we're not going to really be able to, get at what they're wanting effectively if they don't put that in their scope of work.
Yeah. And I think something that's important to note here, where a lot of people may not think it's as important, but your titling to how your RFP is listed on some of the sites, even on your website, right?
Yep.
Like, I couldn't tell you how many RFPs we've responded to that I've been like, thank goodness, Lexi, that you downloaded that, because the title is something completely different. I forget one we responded to not too long ago. It was like IT and hardware consulting. Something like that.
Software and hardware.
Software and hardware services. It's like, well, we don't sell software. We don't sell hardware, so this is probably not for us. But instead of just skipping over that, we actually downloaded it. And when going through the scope of work, it was really a little bit of everything. It was IT strategic planning, cybersecurity assessment. We're about to go through an ERP transition. So I can dive into that a little bit later on how we responded to that. But when your vendors are sifting through thousands of RFPs on a weekly basis, you really need to make sure that your titling tells them something about your project, right? And that is just because, these things are time consuming to read. And, there's time, there's so much time spent in just identifying what we want to respond to, because we are very, very selective in what we're going after. But Lexi mentioned something about a vague scope of work. And I know we released a poll, I think early last week, on what are some potential red flags that you guys are seeing when responding to an RFP, and we got an 80% vote on vague scopes of work. So let's just go ahead and dive into that, Lexi. I mean, Lexi mentioned it earlier, a lot of times there seems to be no visioning, no executive alignment, no conversation at the beginning of a project before the RFP is even crafted, right? There is no conversation about, what do we want this project to solve for us? Right? Whether that is an IT strategic plan or business process redesign, what are the outcomes that we as an organization want? And I feel like that's where people need to start. Let's all get in a room and outline what we want to come from this project. And let's start there. Do you have thoughts, Lex, on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Unfortunately, there have been times when we've responded to RFPs and we thought, oh, we're going to reach out to somebody. We have a contact here or something. And that contact is like, oh, the IT department put that out. I'm not involved. That's very clear that it's very, one person is driving the project and no one else knows what's going on. And you're not going to have a lot of organizational buy-in, and you may not have a lot of success if that's the case. They really need to all get in the room together and understand what the project is, what the outline is, and why it's important.
And narrow those things down, right? I mean, really narrow the scope and be as descriptive as possible. I love starting with the outcomes. What are you trying to solve with this project, and let that be your scope, right? It's so important to make sure everyone is aligned on the front end. We read a lot of RFPs that are duplicates from another county or another city.
Mm-hmm.
Just, this CIO or this CFO or this whoever person copied an RFP
Yeah.
that was released sometimes 5 years ago.
Uh-huh.
You can only imagine how much things have changed since then. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're reading this and we're like, oh my gosh, we just responded to that for this other
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
how
Mhm.
I will say this, while there is some crossover, you may be experiencing some of the same pain points. Your organization is very different, very, very different.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that you can review other people's RFPs, but please make it your own depending on what you're dealing with specifically in
Yeah.
your organization. Because, too, sometimes when you copy RFPs, vendors like us think it's written for somebody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because, the RFP that you copied could have been awarded to another vendor, one of
Exactly.
our competitors.
Yes.
And we're like, well, they just copied this because that said vendor is
That's
going
who
to
they
get
want.
awarded again.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's getting into favoritism and not a very fair and competitive
Yeah.
process, if you ask me.
Yes.
Do
Definitely.
you have thoughts on that, on copied RFP?
Yeah, and the copying and pasting too. Sometimes you see an organization do it for previous RFPs they have put out. So, taking their own, and sometimes in RFPs we even respond to, it's for our services, but it'll say something about must have a certified engineer on the project or must have, an architect, things like that. And you're like, that came out of left field, but it's because they're copying and pasting
Mm-hmm.
previous RFPs that are not even relevant to this, and they're not taking the time to go through it. And that causes a lot of chaos and confusion.
It does.
And then people are like, oh, well, we don't have one of those on our team, not going to respond. A lot of people won't even inquire about it, and you probably won't get many responses.
Yeah, that's so true. And something you brought up a while ago was the IT director, right? And
Yeah.
we love our IT directors. They are so key in any digital transformation project, right? But sometimes, not sometimes, when you have them involved, they really understand your systems, your infrastructure, your security measures, anything that has to do with hands-on hardware technology and how it runs in or in your organization. IT's role, right?
Yes.
A lot of the times they do not understand finance processes, procurement processes,
Yeah.
the HR
Yeah.
process. So really, you need to take that into consideration. Take it with a grain of salt.
Yes.
IT is good in their lane, in their lane, in their lane only. So when they are crafting RFPs, it's going to be very, very technical. And when I am reading a technical RFP, it's very hard, as Lexi said, to get us to respond because it's too technical. It sounds like, you guys are not needing any strategic services.
Yes.
It sounds very technical. So
Very in the weeds.
yes, very in the weeds, and just be mindful of that. Again, I am not downing our IT guys. We and gals. We love our IT directors, and they play a key role in any digital transformation project. But it is hard when you're letting them and them only craft your requirements for your RFP. So we did have a tie for second place in the poll, and one of which is we had a tie. So no background on the organization and no pre-bid meeting. Why are these important? This is a great comment and great question. We did have a tie. When Lexi and I are responding or deciding to respond, and reading RFPs, we love to read a very detailed background. Where has your organization been? Where's it going? What have you done to prepare for this RFP? Is this part of a strategic plan? What are your goals moving forward? We want to know why now?
Yeah.
Why are you deciding to do this project right now? Why is it important? We want you to answer that question for us because it gives us more insight into what you're looking for.
Yes.
What systems you're currently using. If you are looking for an ERP project or an ERP consultant and you're looking to upgrade your systems, we need to know what systems you're currently operating on and why you're looking at this point in time to go to a newer system.
And I would also piggyback off that, Megan. The background piece is really nice when everything you said is included, current systems, things like that, but also like, why is the project happening now? What is, the push behind this project? Why now? Why not 5 years ago? Why is there a difference? What, like pain points, what are you experiencing that has made you go out for this project? It's really nice to know. And then we can tailor our response toward that and see, what are similar projects we've worked with that would also make sense for this. So yes, background is very, very nice and gives us a lot of context about the project.
It does. And other things to include in your background, how many departments are we talking? How many end users are we talking? Who is going to be affected most by this project? Who's in charge of the project? Who's leading the project?
Yeah.
Do you have a, executive team that meets on a regular basis to discuss this project? Anything that you can give us that will give us more detail to craft a better response is key. I think of things like, have you been breached in the last 2 years? Is that what prompted this RFP to be out on the street?
Yeah,
Did you have a failed implementation? And if you did have a failed implementation, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? Don't just say I had a failed implementation. Tell me what happened, so that we can better craft our response. The second thing was no pre-bid meeting.
Yes.
Pre-bid meetings are very, very good, again, for us to get more of that background information that sometimes is omitted from the RFP document.
Yeah.
It's a great space where we as vendors can ask more clarifying questions. I know one of the ones we ask all the time is around the MBE requirements, minority owned and disabled veteran owned businesses, that sometimes they need, they have requirements in their organizational laws that they need to contract at least a percentage to a minority, which is great, but sometimes those requirements are not very clear. So we need to ask questions. What other questions, Lexi, do we typically ask pre-bid?
So going off the minority requirements, like you said, the pre-bid meetings, not only can they be very helpful to clarify what the requirements are, but also a lot of them have like networking where, put your name in the chat and put if you're a minority business, and then I can get a whole list of those and be like, now I know who's interested in this to reach out. So I'm not just reaching out to firms who have zero interest in this project. So that's very helpful. Very helpful when you're unsure of the scope and need some clarifying questions. And I also say, you don't have to absolutely do a pre-bid. It's very helpful. But at least if you want good responses, at least have like an open Q&A session, where you post questions on a portal. We'll post answers on this date, or we'll post answers via addenda, something. Because if you're truly in this like cone of silence where you won't talk to anyone about it, like just the information in the RFP is what it is. Do your best. That's going to hurt yourself, and you're not going to get great responses.
Yes. So Kyler says, who should be in charge of the RFP process from an organizational standpoint in local government? What are your thoughts, Lex?
So that's hard. I was just reviewing an RFP this morning, for the contacts on it. And it's not uncommon for them to say, here's the procurement contact if you have any procurement related questions. And here's the contact for the scope of work. Because most of the time, those people are not the same people. The procurement person is not going to be in the weeds and know the scope and understand what this project is per se. So that's very hard. I kind of like it when they break it up like that, because then I know who to reach out to if I have something, procurement related, and I know who to reach out to for the exact project, like who's going to be the project expert on this. Because sometimes I'll reach out to a procurement professional about a scope of work or questions, and they're like, oh, I just handle the procurement process. I don't know about the scope of work. And then you don't really know what to do if they don't tell you who to contact. So I kind of like when they have it broke up like that. But I would say, the typical consultant answer, it depends on, your organization. It always depends. Different things could work better for different organizations.
We're 20 minutes in, and that's the first time we've used
it.
No, I agree. So really, I think, Kyler, to answer your question, procurement should be, y'all, I'm going dark for some reason, but just bear with it. The sun is an issue right now. Procurement is very important when it comes to the RFP process. So in terms of ownership, who should own it? I think it should live in procurement, but that doesn't mean that we can't break down these silos and get IT's input, HR's input, finances input, because all of those departments are going to be affected in some way, shape, or form, right? So that's why I say the executive alignment piece is so key before crafting the RFP. Procurement plays a very, very unique role in that they keep the organizations out of jail, right? They keep us all out of trouble, and they make sure that all the laws are abided by. Now, sometimes procurement laws can be a little nuts, if you ask me, a little wild, and I think they should be, evaluated every so often, every 2 to 3 years, because some of the requirements get ridiculous. But at the end of the day, I think it should live in procurement just because they're more up to date on what keeps us out of trouble, right?
Yes.
So great question. I love that question. But ultimately it comes down to a team approach.
Yes.
Really, government agencies are very, very much siloed. And it has to, those silos have to be broken, right? To get anything done.
Yes.
Christina. Hey, Christina, thanks for joining us today. So Christina is a senior consultant on the Avero team who does a great job. And she's actually helped QA a lot of our responses and actually worked on crafting a lot of our responses. So thanks, Christina, for joining us today. But she says, can't wait to dive into the subcontractor requirements. Yeah, those are difficult, and again, sometimes they're just in there to check a box. It really feels like these organizations are checking a box, but for us, it adds more time to our response process. Yes. Go ahead, Lexi, dive into that. Why does it add time?
It adds a lot of time, especially, if there's no pre-bid meeting, if there's no list of interested parties that are, can fulfill the subcontractor roles. I'm just having to basically go to a state database and search relevant companies that do anything around consulting. And sometimes it may not really be their bread and butter of this project, but we're having to use them because we have to fulfill the requirement. And so it's not great. And I wish there was better clarification on it, because sometimes I have had a hard time before finding the subcontractors, and I reach out to the RFP contact and they're like, oh, that's just a goal. That's not, you don't have to fulfill it, just a goal, the ideal, but not mandatory. And I'm like, that would be really nice if you made that clear on the front end, because here I am, have spent all this time on it.
Right.
So that is something I really do try to clarify. If there's Q&A available on a portal, that'll probably be the first question I ask. Is this a requirement? If we can't find someone, do we have to prove good faith effort that we've reached out to X amount of companies, things like that, because will save me a lot of time on the front end, not having to go through that process if I get clear requirements on what they're expecting.
Yes, and that's a great point, because sometimes when the requirements are very, or when they're not clear, right, we will kill an RFP because we have other RFPs that we are responding to that we have a better chance of winning, and we're not having to spend so much time engaging with all these minority-owned businesses. By the way, we're a minority-owned business in multiple states, but that's probably a whole nother topic of conversation for another live stream. We could go down a rabbit hole with that. There are different requirements at different levels to be able to get certified. And then sometimes, it will say, like, can we get certified upon winning? Because we're
a minority business. Yeah.
Right. We're a minority-owned business in the state of Tennessee, the state of California, et cetera. Are those licenses reciprocal, right? And sometimes it's no. But anyway, that is a huge pain point.
Huge hurdle.
If you could just be a little bit more clear on those specific requirements, or, as Lexi mentioned, offer up a Q&A, that would be very helpful.
Yeah.
also on your a lot of these organizations have a list like you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
that we have to go through and find
Yeah.
consultants that do what we do. So if there's any way to segregate that list, right, into by organization,
Yeah.
is because sometimes we're going through all kinds of businesses that have nothing to do with the project at hand.
Yes.
And so that's a lot of the
Definitely.
time spent as
Yes.
well.
Yeah. For sure.
Um, so Kyler says it feels like, let me show this. Sorry, guys. Feels like procurement can sometimes play the role of gatekeepers in ERP projects. Whoo, man. Kyler's trying to hit our hot buttons this morning.
Yeah.
Hot buttons.
Yeah.
Lexi, I feel like I've talked a lot, so I'm going to let you take this one.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Kyler. And that's totally, totally true. Like Megan said, we appreciate our procurement people so much. They keep their entity out of jail. They have to follow these requirements. But like she said, some of these requirements are a bit antiquated. And some entities, it's just the way they've always done it. They may not have to do it that way anymore, but they still do just because that's what they've done for the past 100 years. And that makes it harder because when you put all these procurement requirements in there and get very technical with it, it's harder for people to respond. Like, procurement is the one that requires all these required forms on RFPs. If it was up to me, like, no required forms whatsoever, we will do required forms with the person who wins. Because if you don't win, what's going to happen in those required forms? They mean nothing. You filled them out, you signed them, you got them notarized for nothing, basically. Because, and I get it, they're just, if you miss a form, we can remove them from the process. They're narrowing, the field of consultants. So I do get that, but they definitely play a gatekeeper role. In a good and bad way. It can be very hard sometimes when there is so much procurement jargon and laws referenced and things like that in an RFP, when we're just trying to really get to what is the project and what do you need.
Yes, sometimes we're sifting through, 200-page documents because there are all these required forms and laws, definitions that we have to read. And I understand they serve their purpose, right? But when you're looking to engage a vendor for a specific service, do not overwhelm them with 200-page documents.
Yes, completely agree.
I do think, this is getting a little off topic, but in terms of gatekeeping, sometimes organizations reach out to us and we send out a scope of work and, they're ready to sign on the dotted line, but then in comes procurement and they say, no, we have to go through a competitive bidding process. It's like, well, we have these other vehicles that you guys can piggyback on, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times procurement, they really gatekeep there. Because there's always some excuse, whether it's, well, this contract or this specific project wasn't quote unquote competitively bid, so we can't piggyback off of that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have cooperatives that we use, and we always get stuck in that phase because there always has to be an RFP. And so I wish that, procurement agencies would do a little bit more, or procurement, sectors would do a little bit more research on how to effectively use, piggybacking and then also cooperative agreements. So,
completely agree. There are other ways to go, to have a competitive bidding process. They don't all have to be through RFP, but I think procurement professionals, I mean, they likely know that, but RFP is the safest route, so they stick with that. But there are other ways to still have a competitive process, getting 3 quotes from 3 different vendors, something like that. There are other ways to do it.
Yes, absolutely. Kyler also asked, how do you articulate and prioritize soft strategies like change management in an RFP format? I think this is a great question, and I think enough people or enough organizations do this in their RFPs. We've seen 2 or 3 lately who have, and those organizations seem to have really done their research and
Yes.
they know what it takes
Yeah.
to go through a digital transformation project. They get the people side of it.
Yeah.
I would say don't shortcut those things, right?
Yeah.
These projects are oftentimes they're not technology projects, guys. They're people. It's
Yeah.
managing people. It's managing change. It's changing the way that they've done their operations for hundreds of years, right? So make sure you do include those in your RFP because that is a huge part of the project. And during implementation, we budget for that. You will see a big piece of our implementation budget is dedicated to change management practices. Lexi, do you have thoughts on change management or any other soft strategies to include?
Yeah, I think it's a great thing, like you said, when we've saw multiple RFPs recently that have thought about change management because a lot do not. And that is a huge part of the project. If you're only focused on the technical side and getting a new system up and running, you're going to miss getting the stakeholder buy-in probably without change management. I saw a Q&A release the other day for an RFP that somebody asked the question about change management. And they were like, not in scope. And it's like, it has to be in scope. It's like, it almost has to be because you can't do this project successfully without change management. And I don't think people understand that sometimes, but we are seeing that it is becoming more of a thing they call out, which is good. That I think that they're realizing that has to be part of the project if you want it to be successful.
Yes, yes. And part of change management, guys, is role identification, right? Like especially during implementation, you
Yeah.
need to know who's handling what,
Yeah.
right? That's change management. Training, end user support, communication, all of that plays into change management. So yes, it has to be prioritized because as Lexi said, you cannot do these types of projects without change management.
Yeah.
There's no way. And I'm getting on my soapbox here.
Yeah.
But you really need to think about including soft strategies like that. You really
Yes.
do.
Definitely.
And if you need help with that, please reach out to Lexi or I. We're happy to help with any kind of scope crafting and any questions you have in regards to your digital transformation projects.
Yeah.
Let's talk about budget. I know we mentioned budget a little bit, but I feel like sometimes when we are putting together a bid, we're not guessing. Sometimes we are because the scope is unclear,
Yeah.
right? And we don't really know what you guys are wanting. And so we just kind of, Lexi and I have a chat and it's like, well, it kind of sounds like they want business process mapping, but they also need a 5-year plan, whatever the case may be. And so it's like, well, price it this way or price it that way, or let's increase the hours on, process mapping. Let's increase the budget there, but let's take away some hours on, this executive alignment or whatever. That's a bad example, guys, but whatever the case may be, we are throwing darts at the wall and hoping that they stick because the scope is very unclear.
Very vague.
What would you suggest? Would you suggest that organizations put what their budget range is for a project in the RFP? I mean, that could be helpful.
It's definitely helpful. Yes. Because then we're able to say, okay, this is something they will consider. This is within the range, or, oh, we're way off. We were going to price this way higher based on what they wanted. Maybe they don't really want the full scope of what we're thinking. Things like that. So I think it's great when they provide a range. A lot of entities, unfortunately, are very hesitant to do that because then they say, oh, well, it's not competitive. We gave the range, etc. We kind of pigeonholed ourselves. And I guess they think they could have got a lower budget if they wouldn't put their range up. But I don't really think that's the case. And I think you'll actually you'd actually probably get lower budgets because people know what that range is considering, especially with business process mapping. Megan and I go through this all the time. Entities say they want business process mapping. They are not clear how many processes they want mapped, hardly ever. You may say, we want the processes mapped for all 7 departments. but what do you consider a process? How
Mm-hmm.
many are there in each department? That could easily add up to hundreds of processes being mapped
Mm-hmm.
easily. So we have a hard time when it comes to budget, business process mapping. Okay, we'll give it this amount, but do we need to throw in the caveat up to 20 processes? Because that's very hard to give a lump sum price for that when we don't know the details of how many processes.
Yeah, and we don't know the complexities of your organization, right? We don't know what we're potentially stepping into. So a lot of times we do pigeonhole ourselves. And
Uh-huh. Yeah.
what you're trying to avoid altogether is this idea of scope creep, right?
Yeah.
You need to be as detailed as possible on the front end, especially when it comes to budgeting and resource allocation. You've got to define what you really need, or in Lexi's example, how many processes you need mapped,
Mhm.
because that's going to determine how many resources we need and your budget, right? And how many hours we need to spend. It's so important. It
Yes.
really is. And you will alleviate scope creep if you're more detailed on the front end, because we
Completely
can't,
agree.
we can't go under trying to do 1,000 process maps.
Mhm.
Guys,
Yeah.
just for example, I mean, a process map can be anywhere from $1,000 to $2,500 per map, right?
Mhm.
Just based on the complexity and the size of an organization. So just keep that in mind when you're talking about process mapping. Sorry, I went down a rabbit
No,
hole.
you're
Process
I
mapping.
agree
Go ahead.
though. A lot of times the clearer you are on the front end, we see it with organizations that are not clear on the front end. Those are much more likely, those projects, to have change orders and such.
Mhm.
We hate doing change orders. That's unfortunate, but sometimes they weren't clear on the front end. We didn't know what we were fully getting into. And that's what has to happen sometimes. So I think the clearer you can be, the better. You can give a budget range. That's awesome. Sometimes entities say, we've not established a budget for this.
Mhm.
We're going to see what the responses say and go from there. Well, you've had to establish some sort of budget for it. It's
Have to.
got to be in your fiscal year budget, some
Mhm.
sort of placeholder, something. So, there's always got to be a budget. It may not be, as healthy of a budget as you'd like, but there has to be something. And there's always ways we can split these projects up. If you only have 50,000 to 100,000 on the front end, there are ways we can divide our projects up.
Yes, and as a consultant, we're supposed to provide you all with solutions and options and the best way to get there, right?
Yeah.
And the best timelines and within budget.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like a lot of times we do pigeonhole ourselves just because we respond and maybe we're too high or maybe we're too
Mm-hmm.
low, right? And then it seems like there is no backing off. Even if we get shortlisted, we say, hey, if this isn't, if we didn't knock it out of the ballpark here with our budget and how we, allocated our resources to your project, can we chat about that? Because we're more than open
Yeah.
to re-strategizing, right? Maybe we got
Yes.
it wrong. Maybe we,
Yeah.
read what you wanted wrong, or maybe it just wasn't clear. And again,
Mm-hmm.
we threw darts at a wall and tried to figure out what you needed.
Yeah.
So,
Mm-hmm.
An open conversation about that, I would like to see more about of that. And maybe guys, help me. Maybe there's a law restricting that. Maybe the budget is the budget in some states, in some counties and cities. But I would love to be able to negotiate more on the back end. Because
Agreed. Once we know more, yeah.
more.
We actually, an RFP we responded to a month or so ago, it was called an RFQ, qualifications, not a full-on proposal, but it truly was a full-on proposal. The only thing they didn't want was a budget.
Mm-hmm.
And they are going to, shortlist entities, and whoever they like best, they will then negotiate pricing with that one. And I think that's great, because a lot of times at the end of the day, the pricing may not be that different between vendors. And then you truly know who you're going for, and who you like and who you would work best with. And you're not just picking something based on the pricing.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with that. And two, I want to bring up another example because this one just threw me for a loop. So recently we responded to an RFP that was for 4 counties total.
Yes. Yep.
4 counties total, guys.
Yep.
Very interesting. Very interesting. But because it was for 4 counties, we were like, okay, interesting. And so what they were wanting to do is implement a new system across 4 counties.
One system for 4
One
counties.
same
Yep.
system for 4 counties. Okay, as you can imagine, maybe we need to do another live on breaking down this one specific
Yeah.
example. But as you can imagine, Lexi and I are on a Zoom call and we're like, okay, how are we going to approach this? Because number one, these counties are not all the same size. They don't have all the end users.
Yep.
They may not have the same pain points that this large, very, very large county over here does. So how are we going to allocate resources and help them select a system that may or may not work for all 4 counties? It was a nightmare.
Yeah.
And I have a point here, I think. But budgeting for this response was very, very hard. It was very hard. And we had to do a lot of back end research. So it took time. Lessons learned, or if I was, if it were up to me, my suggestion would be to, number one, each county should have its own RFP.
Yeah, they should have went out to RFP separately. For
Separately.
Sure.
That's step
separate projects.
Because each organization is unique. Each organization has its own pain point. Each organization has different processes on how they use a tax system. And so within this same RFP, thank you, Clay. I like this background. Sorry, I just saw that pop up, squirreled. But then the same response, they said that they hadn't selected a system yet. But then they came back and said, hey, we're doing demos right now. And it's like, oh my goodness. Okay. Well, this changes things, right? So this example was a wild one, and I'm still shocked by it. But any thoughts on this example? The budget was crazy to try to build out a budget for 4 counties. And they didn't want it broken out by each county. They wanted a lump sum.
This one was super weird. And they came back and they wanted it broken out by county.
Yep.
But it's just so hard because, like you said, they really should have went out to different RFP for each one. And if they're going to use the same system, they probably have, it's for a tax system. They each may have different systems in place currently. Some may not have a system in place, doing it all by paper. Like, it all varies per entity. And unfortunately, this one county took the lead on it, and it was kind of called their RFP. So we may got to know about that county, but not the 3 others, really. So very strange. And you could tell when they sent follow-up questions that, they're kind of unsure of what exactly the scope is in terms of, they said, well, what if one county doesn't want a PM a lot, through implementation? What if one does need one full-time on site, things like that. And those are things you really need to have settled before you go out to RFP. Are we going to have the same expectations across the board for all 4 counties? Are we going to have different expectations? Maybe we want to project manage it internally. I wouldn't recommend that. Probably wouldn't go well. But that's kind of where they said they were at, that they're all on different wavelengths and they are unsure.
Yeah. And think about this too. I didn't even think about this at the time, but IT department, for the small county over here, they may not even have the technical support they need for for said system to be implemented. And that's crazy to think about.
Yes.
So how are they going to handle that internally? So anyway, our point is here, again, before issuing an RFP, if you have questions, guys, our job is to be, again, the trusted advisor in the market to help answer these types of questions. How do we approach this project from 4 county standpoint? What is the best approach? Ask us. we're not just here to respond to your RFPs or gripe and complain about how awful the RFPs are. We're here to help guide you in your next project. So please reach out to us. Okay, small commercial. So let me go to some questions. Kyler, I'm curious, you guys, with the industry transitioning to a more composable or modular microservices based approach, can you do a phased implementation approach in an RFP?
Yeah, I would say absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, I have saw RFPs where they wanted implementation broke up into 3 different phases.
Mhm.
And just my mom went to this several months ago. AV was on a LinkedIn Live with Judith, the ERP expert, and she talked about the mindful pause or, the
Mhm.
rest, things
Yes,
like that. And I think that's so important to build into these projects because staff can get burnout, things like that. And I think it's good to kind of take a pause and, do a phased implementation approach. I think that's actually a very unique, good idea and will prevent some burnout because these are long projects.
they are. And
Yeah.
there's so much change involved. So
Hmm.
I mean, we've
Yeah.
gone through implementations on the Avero side, guys, and
Yeah.
I wanted to pull my hair out, and I'm thinking, why in the world are we doing this right now? I've got thousands of things
Yeah.
to do, and that's another great point. You guys have day jobs, but there's
Yeah.
so much change going on, right?
Yep.
And it's easy to forget why the organization should be championing this change. So I think a mindful pause is key in this,
Hmm.
very key.
Yeah.
So no, I think a phased approach is unique. And then also I kind of like when RFPs, the scopes break each phase down, but also
Hmm.
have the caveat in there where it says, we can go out to RFP again for each phase if we don't like the work that's being done by this vendor for this phase, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like that caveat because it doesn't, you guys aren't pigeonholing yourselves to one
Hmm.
consultant for all, you know, 10 phases or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You can break it up. If you don't like the service you're being provided, you can go out to RFP again for the next phase. And I think that's a healthy decision to make as an organization. Now, it does make your timeline longer, right? But
Hmm.
you're not pigeonholing yourself to that bad customer service.
Agreed.
It's out
Yeah. And going off your point, Megan, I really like when they have a caveat. I've saw where they've broken up phases before, and the phases are kind of a little wonky and
there.
kind of
Mhm.
an opposite way of how we would normally do it. And I like when they have that caveat. This is just what we're thinking off the cuff. But if you have a better
Mhm.
approach, different way to phase it, please propose that. I like where they're recognizing you all are the experts in this. This
Yeah.
is what we think the phases will be. But if you have a different way of doing it or different recommendations, please propose that. I really like that because then I know, okay, we don't have to do it their way, even though that may not make the most sense. Because if we propose something different, we'll get disqualified.
Yeah.
It's really nice when they throw it back to the consultant to be like, you all are the experts. If you have something different, please propose that.
Yes, I do like that too. Or if
Yeah.
there's anything we're leaving out, right?
Yes.
Say that in this page, right?
Hmm.
I've
Yeah.
seen a lot of that lately. We have.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
so
Which
it,
is
it
really
allows
nice.
us to actually do our jobs very well because we are
Yes.
consultants and we are very nerdy about these types
Yeah.
of things. Obviously, we've been talking 48 minutes about why your RFPs are being ignored. Another question is, how do you secure a budget for a phased approach?
So, how do you secure a budget? So that's interesting. I feel like we still, from our end, Megan, go about the budget process the same way, but there's able to be more like building caveats when it's a phased approach. We're not just
Mhm.
throwing a lump sum at you. We're able to phase it, like especially on implementation pricing. We
Yeah.
really like to throw in caveats that say, you're at the very first assessment stage at this point. We have no clue who you're going to choose. A lot of this depends on the vendor. Some vendors could be very hands-on and project manage it on their side as well. Some vendors sell you the software and then they're done with it. And then that's a lot of heavy lifting on our end. So we really like to put in caveats that, all that depends on the vendor. At that point, when we don't know who you're choosing, it's very hard to commit to a budget at that point. So we like to say, here's a roundabout number. This is probably going to change. We're not going to be held to this amount. So I can see, though, on the entity side where it's probably harder to secure funding for something like that when, they say, well, we have phase 1 and 2 pricing and it's pretty concrete, but we have no idea about phase 3. So I do understand that can be hard from the entity's standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And just phasing that budget out. I mean, we do it for ERP consulting all the time when they're looking for, someone to come in, select, craft the RFP, help them, do vendor demos, contract negotiation, et cetera. That's all broken down, really into, it should be 3 phases, but it's 2 sometimes, right? And like you said, putting in those caveats, like this really ultimately depends on which vendor you choose and what their timelines are. And what our workload will be on the back end, right? So putting that in there, and that is hard. And if you're unsure about funding, I would see what's out there in the market, meaning issue an RFQ, a request for qualifications, prepare yourselves, or reach out to us, and we're happy to provide you with the range. Call our competitors. They're happy to provide you with the range too. So there was another question about the example we gave, I feel like somewhere. Yeah. Mick.
Yeah, I think it was Mick.
Yeah. What was their thought process in applying the same system to 4 different counties? What's the advantage? That's a great question. I have no idea. I am trying to still answer the first part. What was their thought process in applying the system? Maybe they thought it would, be easier from a reporting standpoint. I don't know.
Yeah, and Kyler responded. She said, "Great question. I'd assume they'd want to be able to integrate processes and tech across counties. Nothing worse than having different systems." And I think that's true. And doing some research on this, there were some state-specific tax laws around this. So I get that, but I almost just feel like each county really needs to have their own system. Even if it's the same, that's fine. But sharing a system is a whole complexity that I can't even imagine really how that will work. I really can't.
I guess there are some advantages, but I mean, I always think about the small guy. There were in this specific RFP, there were 2 very, very large counties, who seemed to be running the show, right? In this process. These small guys, how did they have the budget for the same system that these larger guys? I mean, you're talking about a NetSuite versus a Workday or an Oracle. Like those are 2 very,
very different,
platforms and very different costs. And so there are just so many things wrong with the thought of, issuing an RFP in 4 different counties. There's so many unknowns and so many risks involved. But great question. I love this example just because, it's the first one I've seen, number one, but I think it needs to be, talked about more. Do not, please. And because of the, we got more questions a few weeks ago that we had to respond to. And I think because of that, I think they're going to get very limited responses because it's just a very, very complex project. They may not get the responses that they need. I know we've been talking for almost an hour, but there are some things that I do want to touch on. We didn't talk about page limits. We've talked about it before, but that was another pain point on our poll on LinkedIn is the 10-page limit. Guys, we cannot say everything we need to say to market ourselves well and to respond well to a 10-page RFP. Resumes alone for our project team are more than 10 pages.
And I am responding to one this week, actually. That's a 10-page limit. And I reached out and I said, you say you want resumes. I don't know how we can do all this with resumes. They said, well, put the resumes in a separate file. That's fine. Okay, that's helpful. But again, the 10-page limit. And they said, if you do above this, you will be counted off. So very strict 10-page limit. Just to give you reference, most of our RFPs, if we don't have any limit, they're around 40 to 50 pages. And all of that is helpful information to have in there. It's not just marketing fluff. It's not just extra informational material. It all serves a purpose.
Yes.
And when you have very tight page limits, we're having to cut a lot of that, and we're not getting to show you much about ourselves at all, which is unfortunate because you're going to have the bare bones for all proposals, basically, and they're going to be telling you their methodology, but you're not going to really get to learn anything about the company, see deliverable samples, anything like that. It's really hard and frustrating. And it really gets me. Luckily, this was not the case with the current one I'm working on, but I have saw 125-page RFPs before, and then they want to limit your response to 20 pages when they just release something that's, quadruple plus that. So that's very frustrating.
It is so frustrating. And guys, I can't tell you this enough. As a consulting firm, we love to provide you all with options, right? There is no one size fits all approach to the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
Right. So when we respond to something, we are going to lay out what we think and lay out options for you, right? Based on multiple different things. Hey, if you want process mapping versus you don't want process mapping, what does that timeline look like? Maybe you want this over here, but you don't want that over there. Your vendors should be providing you with options, not just a one size fits all. They should be including in their responses why this will work versus why it wouldn't, based on your scope and what you're wanting out of this. They should be a consultant in their response, and they can't be a consultant in 10 pages.
Yeah, agreed. Completely agree. Yeah.
They can't. Another thing we struggle with is, we've talked about this before, physical versus paper submissions. Please, let's get rid of the snail mail. I can't tell you, at least 2 times this year, we mailed our response on time. It was time stamped, and it was delivered to the wrong department that we had no control over, even though it's on the envelope. It needs to be delivered to this person in this department, blah, 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 blah. And it was delivered to somewhere else on our campus, and they didn't accept our response, which was completely out of our control. It was delivered on time stamped, and they were like, sorry. Well, that's money out of our pockets.
It is. And we've saw crazy weather events lately. We had a big snowstorm earlier this year, and our proposal showed up late. And you couldn't drive it there because the interstates are closed.
I couldn't get out of my house.
Yeah, you're really limiting yourself. Lots of companies will be like, physical submission, I'm not even bothering. Not worth my time. Yeah,
that's right.
So just lots of crazy things can happen that you're going to end up having to disqualify people for things outside of their control completely when they were following the directions.
And it's, again, if we have to come down to eliminating a proposal because we have too much on our plates that week, we're killing the one that's physical submission.
Yep.
Every time, because it takes at least 45 minutes for Lexi to print off a 30-page response, bind it, put it in order of what the RFP says, take it to FedEx or whoever has the cheapest shipping rates. It takes a lot of time and adds a lot of time to our plate. So, if we're having to kill one, that's what we look at: tight timelines. And we also look at physical versus electronic submission.
Yes.
But on the flip side, on the electronic submission, don't make it too hard. Sometimes we log into portals and it's like we can't even find the RFP that.
Yeah, agreed.
Sometimes they're not user friendly, but I know that has to do with systems and different things that you guys purchase, for your organizations. But there are better ways, to post that RFP or give us directions in the RFP instead of all the
make it clear,
step-by-step screenshots of how we need to submit this in your portal if it's a clunky process, or give us a person to call. That'd be great. So let's go to the last few comments and we're going to wrap up here. Kyler says, I feel like a page limit is weird. Just let them say what they need to say. If they send you a novel, just don't go with them. Exactly. Exactly. It is. It is. And I don't, maybe someone can educate us. Why do you,
Why?
why? Why? And she also, she says, what paper? Yeah, I know. Why would you buy 125? Save the tree. Yes, exactly. Exactly. We should probably, that might make a fun post of how many trees we
Save
kill.
the tree.
Save the trees. How much paper we go through just submitting some of these physical responses. But to wrap up today, I know we covered a lot and we went down some rabbit holes on things that we are very, very passionate about when it comes to RFPs and why you guys aren't getting the responses that you need. But ultimately, if you have questions, please reach out to us. We are live on every single platform out there. We're nerds about this stuff. And at the end of the day, we love people. We love building relationships and we want to help you craft your next RFP. So please reach out to us. To wrap up, make sure you have a vision of what problem you are trying to solve when you release an RFP, right? Get in the room with your executive level team, include IT, include procurement, but have a conversation about what problem you are trying to solve and what outcomes you are trying to get to. Then start crafting your RFP.
Yes.
Make sure that you're not copying other people's RFP. I think it's good to use other RFPs as a reference. I have tons that I send to organizations like, hey, if you're looking to, if you're looking for an ERP consultant, I really like this scope. I really love this scope. I think it's good to use it as reference. Do not copy it. Please do not copy it because vendors oftentimes think that, it's written for somebody else. We've seen it multiple times. Make sure you provide a healthy background that answers the question, why this, why now? Why is your organization wanting to take on such a large project or such a small project, right? Why now? Make sure that your requirements are clear. Don't make them vague. In particularly your subcontracting requirements. When you're requiring MBEs and women-owned businesses, I think that's great. I really do. But make sure it's not just something you're doing to check the box and confuse your vendors. And if they're not clear, have a Q&A or a pre-bid meeting to further define some of those. And then reevaluate your page limit requirements and your forms and all the things, because a lot of those forms can be done after we've won the contract, right? We don't need to be spending our time on forms when you guys are trying to solve a problem for your organization. What else did I leave out, Lexi?
The page limits we just discussed. You'll get a lot better responses if you just let consultants write what they want to write. Don't put them on a limit, and I get a 50 to 70 page limit if you've in the past got really long proposals like 200 pages. I get that, but if you're going to do a limit, at least make it a reasonable one.
That's right.
10
20.
to 20.
Give us 20.
Agreed.
20. And I like the caveat of making sure that the resumes don't count in the page limit.
Put them in an appendix. That's fine. Doesn't count.
Yes.
But yeah, that's helpful as well as not doing the physical submission. There's so many other ways. You don't even have to belong to a bid portal. You can email. A lot of times these things are not big enough where they would get bounced back in an email or anything. And if they are, there's Dropbox links. There's so many other ways to do, submission of a proposal besides physical.
Yes. And having a contact person is key when things go south or when we need clarification. Sometimes, there are very tight rules about you can't contact this person, you can't contact that person, but then there's no one to contact. And it's like, we have all these questions. So what do we do? So just make sure you have a clear communication path when you're putting together your RFPs. But Other than that, we could talk for probably another 2 hours about
Mm,
RFPs. We love them. We love responding to them. But most importantly, we love giving you guys options and solutions to your problems.
yeah.
So, without further ado, make sure I'm going to share a QR code really quick with you guys. Make sure you go out to our website and download the 2025 report, or just scan this QR code and download right now. This is our insights to our 2025 digital transformation consulting advice that you guys can read. There's a lot of great insight in there based on what we've seen in
Mhm.
the industry over the last year. So we're excited to release that. We also have our top government ERP systems list. It is on our website as well, along with many other blogs and client stories, success
Yeah.
stories that we love to share with you guys. We go live every Wednesday at 10 a.m., and we're excited to be back on that rotation.
Mhm.
Thank you guys for listening to Lexi and I today vent about our RFP pet peeves and how you guys can get better responses to your
Yeah.
RFPs. If you have questions, please reach out.